All right, thank you guys for leading us. Thank you, men, for singing. Again, as you came in, you should have picked up a book, should have picked up a packet of notes. The first couple of pages on that packet of notes involves introductory material to the class, and then we'll get into the content here in just a minute. There's a few things I want to go over. When we meet together for Emmanuel Institute classes, our theme verse is 2 Timothy 2:2. Which says, "What you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also." And I remind you each time we kick off one of these new classes that the goal in what we're doing is not just to give you information so that your head is filled with more facts, but it's to take what somebody has invested in us and to invest it in you so that you in turn can invest it in others who will then be able to pass it down to still others. And when you look at what Paul said to Timothy in this verse, there's 4 generations. There's Paul and there's Timothy, and then give it to the faithful men, Timothy, and the faithful men will be able to teach others also. So we really are trying to make disciples and equip you to teach your families and to lead here at Emmanuel. So this is our 4th Emmanuel Institute class. We've talked about preaching. We've talked about the importance of worldview. We've worked all the way through the book of Revelation, and we've been on a semester break. And so we're back, and we're going to talk in this session for the next couple months about biblical anthropology. If you want to go back and catch any of those previous classes, they're all on our podcast site where we post all our Sunday morning sermons. The audio is there. You can also get to the video of those sessions. You just go to the Emmanuel homepage. There's a button up at the top of the page that says Institute, and you click on it, and it takes you to a YouTube page that has all those past sessions if you want to catch up. When we go through this course, Biblical Anthropology, I will usually have the audio posted a couple of days after. And it'll usually take me a couple weeks to get the video edited and then put up and uploaded. So that's going to come a little bit later. But if you miss a week in this biblical anthropology class, you will be able to catch the audio online, or if you wait a few weeks, get the video on YouTube. Some of you are tech guys. You don't like paper handouts. You like to download a PDF online. I upload all the notes to our Emmanuel page under publications. You can download a PDF if you prefer to access the notes in that way. In this class, August, September, October, I have 3 goals for what we want to accomplish. Number 1, I want you to understand the importance of the Imago Dei, the image of God. That's what we're going to talk about tonight. Number 2, next month we're going to try to understand the doctrine of sin and how the doctrine of sin shapes how we think about ourselves and how we think about the gospel. And then number 3, understand the Bible's teaching about gender, sex, and marriage. So I have given you a book, and I joked earlier it's a booklet. It is 120 pages, even though it's small format. This is a brand new release from Ligonier Ministries, a field guide on gender and sexuality. There's some good stuff in here in the opening section just about what it means to be human. That's kind of what we're talking about tonight. And then the gender and sexuality stuff we'll pick up in October. And then in between, we're going to talk about the doctrine of sin, which is not directly discussed here, but this is a helpful little booklet. There's good information here. Here's the deal when you read this. You don't have to agree with everything in here. But everything in here is something that you need to think about living in the year 2024. And ultimately, you have to agree with everything in here. And you have to submit to what Scripture says, even when it's not popular. And that's all that this little book is trying to do, is trying to force you to think biblically about some controversial things that the world has seemingly lost its mind about. So this is an easy book. It's an easy read. If you have teenage kids, this would be a great, great resource to work through with them. If you have elementary age kids, that would be the time to start talking to them about these things, not to wait for someone to hit them up in middle school or high school, but to start talking to them about these things. I want to mention 3 more resources to you, because I always want to encourage you to be reading, thinking people. And the field guide book is entry level, pretty simple. Okay, if you step it up one level, there's a book called Created in God's Image by a guy named Anthony Hoekema. I just finished the last chapter of this today. I had read most of it, but just finished the very end of it. This is a really good book. Very helpful for me in my preparation, and great information here. So that's a good resource if you want to go a little bit deeper. If you want to go one step beyond that, one of the books I'm using in this study a lot is by Herman Bavinck. It's titled The Wonderful Works of God. This is a single-volume systematic theology. I think it's the best single-volume systematic theology that I've read. Okay, Bavinck has a full systematic theology. I think it's 4 volumes called Reformed Dogmatics. This is the whole 4 volumes boiled down into one, and it's really, really, really good. I think it's the best single volume systematic that I've read, and he's got great stuff on anthropology. And then Bavinck also has a book. This is volume 1. There is a volume 2 if you want to step up one more notch and you really want to push yourself. He has a book called Reformed Ethics, and it's basically a biblical anthropology in incredible detail. And you might think reading 2 whole books of 500 pages each is overkill, but it's really good and it's really helpful. And the format of this book will stretch you and it'll challenge you, but it's really not that inaccessible because he's a good writer and he's a clear writer, and there's a good translation of his Dutch work. I have listed on your notes some videos. We did this in previous Institute classes. We didn't do it with Revelation, but I've given you 3 videos just to watch on your own. These 3 videos will correspond with the image of God, R.C. Sproul. That's going to go with what we talk about tonight. Just a plug on this video I've given you here. There's a whole series called Dust to Glory, where R.C. goes from the beginning of redemptive history all the way to the end, and it's really good. And you can get it online at YouTube. This is one of the first ones in that series. So something for you to consider. Week 2, Are People Ultimately Good or Bad? Are All Sins Equal? By Steve Wellum. This is part of a series of videos put out by Southern Seminary called Honest Answers. I love these videos. They pose controversial questions or debated questions or things you've always wondered about. And then one of the professors at Southern gives you a 5, 6, 7 minute answer to whatever the question is. Really, really helpful resource. And then week 3, Rosaria Butterfield and Christopher Wan, the Christian Sexual Ethic. It's a seminar hosted by Ligonier. This is a fascinating discussion because both of these people used to live LGBTQ lifestyles and be part of the LGBTQ movement and pushing it and embracing it, and they both left it. And that doesn't mean that they speak with any more authority than anybody who says what the Bible says, but it's really interesting to listen to the things that they have to share. So those videos will walk you through this class. You can see the course schedule for August, September, October. We have Pastor Nick Carraway, who's here with us tonight. He's going to teach next month on the doctrine of sin, hamartiology, and I'm excited to hear what he has to share with us. And then this is not on your notes, but I'm going to just throw it up here so you know where we're headed after Christmas break. Spring 2025, we're going to extend this series on biblical anthropology, and we're going to spend 1 week talking about what does it mean to be a godly husband, 1 week on what does it mean to be a godly dad, and then 1 week on what does it mean to be a good godly churchman. And so we're going to extend all the foundational things we talk about here in the fall into the spring and talk about those 3 topics. I have given you a list of suggested reading. These are just some other resources that you may find helpful, and happy to let you look at any of these if you want to check them out before you buy them. You can't borrow mine, but you can look at them in my office. Then you can give them back to me, and I'll put them back on my shelf where they belong. Happy to let you look at them, not walk out of the building with them. All right? I want to be mindful of your time tonight. I know it's a big night for a lot of people, kids going to school, so we're going to move quickly through this material. We try to do that at Institute, and not a lot of fluff. We'll see how fast we can get through this stuff. All right, introduction. Nearly all the wisdom we possess, that is to say, true and sound wisdom, consists of 2 parts, the knowledge of God and ourselves. This is a quote that lives in my head rent-free all the time. I think about this quote regularly when I prepare to preach, when I prepare to teach, when I talk with people in our church who have questions, when I share the gospel with people who don't know the truth about Jesus Christ. I think it's very helpful what Calvin says. If you can know the truth about God and you can know the truth about yourself, you are well on your way to being a thoughtful, biblically informed person. Underneath this quote, theology proper is the study of God. So sometimes we talk about theology as just a broad word for like Christian doctrine, any teaching we call theology. But specifically used, theology is the study of God. Okay? The study of God, His character, His attributes, His person. So we want to know the truth about God, Calvin tells us, but we also want to know the truth about ourselves, and anthropology is the study of man. In previous generations, the church had to fight about theology proper. And in previous generations, early church era, they had to fight about the doctrine of Christ. Who is He? What is His person and what is His work? And in the period of the Reformation, the church had to fight about the doctrine of salvation. What is the truth about how we're saved? And over the last 100 years, the church has had to fight about the doctrine of revelation. Is the Bible true? Is it inspired by God? And what I'm telling you is that the fight before us today is first and foremost the doctrine of anthropology. And we live in a culture and a time and a place where people are completely upside down confused about what it means to be a human being. And all the things that we might take for granted as obvious are not obvious to the world today. And so the point of this class starting tonight is just to be grounded on what does the Bible say about what it means to be a human being. Here's the modern challenge of anthropology. None of this is news to you. The widespread violence in popular media. Look, violence is as old as Cain and Abel, right? It's not a new problem. But there is something different in our world today with the callousness and the hardness of heart and the complete indifference to horrific violence. Okay, it's a challenge when you're thinking about anthropology. The proliferation of internet pornography, I could throw numbers at you, stats. It's just mind-numbing if you get online and you read about how much pornography is produced and consumed and the money and the time that's spent on it. You just look at the numbers and you say there's not enough people to consume all of this and to take it all in. It's horrific, and it changes the way that we think about what it means to be human. Abortion and the morning after pill. Again, these things are not new in human history. The early Christians had to deal with these very same issues with different technology. Part of the difference that we deal with today in the United States of America is people who not only embrace these things, but celebrate them and boast about them. And there's no shame in it, or there's no embarrassment about these issues. Homosexuality, the transgender movement, we're going to talk about that in a couple of months. Intersectionality, identity politics, we talked about some of that when we discussed worldview in a previous class. Here's one last thought on the modern challenge of anthropology. It's the rise and the dominance of the modern self. And nobody has talked about this more articulately than Carl Trueman. In a previous worldview class, we talked about this book, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. And the idea that people have today that my inner conception of who I am is the most important thing about me, and for you to challenge that or question that is to do great violence to me. And you can't challenge it. You can't approach it. You can't question it. Trueman begins his books talking about his grandfather. And he says, if someone would have walked up to my grandfather and said the words, "I'm a woman trapped in a man's body," he says, my grandfather wouldn't have even known what you're talking about. Like, he wouldn't have even had a category for what that means. And in 2 generations, we've gone to the position culturally where when you say that out loud, everyone says, "Oh, I know exactly what you mean." And there's this unwritten rule that you're not allowed to question that or say that it's wrong or pass any moral judgment on it. It's this rise of the modern self. So there's great challenges as we think about anthropology. Anthropology is a key part of a biblical worldview. So we've talked in the past about James Sire and the components of a biblical worldview. What is prime reality? What is the nature of the world around us? Number 3, what's a human being? Okay, it's a basic worldview question. How do you define a human being? And all the rest of the worldview questions that Sire talks about, what happens to a person after death, that's anthropology. It's about humans. Why is it possible to know anything? How can humans know things? That's a question of anthropology. Right and wrong is ethics, human history, life-orienting core commitments. These are all downstream of how you define what it means to be a human being. So this is an important doctrine. Last here, the place of anthropology and systematic theology. All I'm trying to say to you in this section is, when you think about systematic theology in a book like this by Bavinck, The Wonderful Works of God, and you go to the table of contents, and he starts to talk about the doctrine of God, the doctrine of revelation, the doctrine of the Trinity, the doctrine of sin, the doctrine of salvation, the doctrine of justification, all these doctrines, okay? He's got them nicely and neatly separated into chapters. But you can't nicely and neatly separate doctrine, because it's all wedded together and intertangled together. And if you start to mess with one particular area of your theology, revelation, creation, doctrine of sin, Christology, soteriology, ethics, eschatology, it has an impact on what you believe about human beings. Okay, I'll just give you one example right here under Christology. We sang a song just a minute ago that talked about Jesus, who was God, taking on flesh. That's the doctrine of the incarnation. And that mysterious, miraculous doctrine is impacted by what you believe about human beings. What do you believe about the image of God? What do you believe about the doctrine of sin? How do you fit these things together? It's all connected and it's all interrelated. Okay? Under the confessions, let's just look at the abstract of principles. God originally created man in his own image and free from sin. That's what we're talking about tonight. God created man in his own image, and he's free from sin. Here's what we're going to talk about next month. Through the temptation of Satan, he transgressed the command of God, fell from his original holiness and righteousness, whereby his posterity inherited a nature corrupt and wholly opposed to God and his law, and are under condemnation. And as soon as they are capable of moral action, they become actual transgressors. So tonight our focus is on what does it actually mean to be created in God's image. So let's jump in. Okay, man is a created being. According to Genesis 1 and 2, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth and everything that exists, including human beings. Now that may seem like a very elementary place to start, but that's what you do when you're building a foundation. Okay? We are created beings. God created human beings. As created beings, we are neither autonomous or independent. We are not autonomous. We do not rule ourselves. We are ruled by someone else. And we are not independent. Rather, we are dependent on God for everything that we need for life. Okay? Very quickly, you can look at Nehemiah chapter 9. Nehemiah chapter 9 is a prayer. Nehemiah 9:6, Nehemiah prays, "You are the Lord, you alone. You have made the heaven of heavens with all their hosts, the earth and all that's on it, the seas and all that's in them. You preserve all of them." God's the creator. We're the created. He preserves us. He doesn't need us, but we desperately need Him for everything. Okay, we are dependent on Him. We don't rule ourselves, and we are not independent creatures. Paul says the same thing in Athens as he's talking to the philosophers in Acts 17. He says, God made the world. He sustains everyone. He gives life and breath to all mankind. They depend on Him, but He needs nothing. He is not served by human hands as though He needed anything, like all of these idols spread throughout the city. Okay, God is independent. We are not independent or autonomous. Second, as created persons, we are not pre-programmed like robots. We are not pre-programmed like robots. And I'll just point you to Joshua chapter 24, verse 15, where at the end of his life, Joshua looked at the people of God and he said, if it's evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you'll serve. Are you going to serve the gods of your fathers, the ones that they served in the region beyond the river, the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are now? As for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. He called the people to make a decision about who they were going to serve. They had a real decision to make. Now, what Joshua said in response to their response is a fascinating discussion for another night, but it's a real decision. These are not robots. They're not pre-programmed people. Human beings make real decisions, and our decisions have real consequences, okay? Now, you wed those two things together, and here's what you come up with. All secular anthropologies overemphasize our dependence or our freedom. By a secular anthropology, I mean you take God out of the equation and then you try to define what it means to be human. Okay? No God, remove God. What does it mean to be a human being? And if someone's honest, what you're left with when you take God out of the equation is some people who overemphasize that we are dependent, and they just say, look, you're a product of your environment. Whatever environmental inputs you had, that you are determined to be that kind of person. Or they say, it's just a matter of genetics. Whatever your genes are. It's science, it's chemistry. However you're wedded together in this mystery of science and chemicals and all the rest, that's who you are. And there's really not anything you or anybody else can do about it. And what you're left with is human beings who bear no moral responsibility for anything. Because everything is just determined. The other alternative is you overemphasize our freedom. And you just say, look, you're a blank slate. There is no God. There is no deity up there to tell you who you are or how you should live. So you just get to make it up. Who do you want to be? Ron, one of our elders, sent me a video just a couple nights ago of somebody saying, I self-identify as a millionaire. I like to think of myself as a millionaire. I want to be rich. I want to be wealthy. And you hear someone say it and you say, well, that's ridiculous. But that's exactly the kind of thing that happens in our world every day. I want to identify as you fill in the blank. Okay, it's overemphasizing our freedom, rejecting any idea that there's a God or creator who gets to determine who we are or how we live. Really what we're talking about here is the importance of origin stories. Okay, the Bible is giving us an origin story. If you're a comic fan, there always has to be an origin story. When you watch a superhero movie, you can suspend disbelief just so long, and eventually you say, how did that guy get claws coming out of his hand? It's just a guy with claws. How did this guy fly all over the world and pick up airplanes and stop bullets? And how did this guy turn into such an evil villain? Where did he come from? This guy just drop out of the sky somewhere? And so the people who write comics and make movies, they tell you the origin story. And when you know the origin story, you say, now it makes sense. And what Genesis is giving us when we think about the image of God is an origin story. So this is a great short quote from Herman Bavinck. Origin determines direction and purpose. Okay? The story of human origins determines the direction our lives ought to take and the purpose that our lives ought to have. He says this elsewhere, the image of God is the distinguishing earmark. If it's the distinguishing earmark of man, we owe it to ourselves to get a clear idea of the content of it. So let's work through some biblical text. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 to 28. Then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over the livestock, over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them. And God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth. Okay? This is a fundamental biblical text for understanding who we are as humans and what it means that we have the image of God. So just a couple of thoughts here. In the creation story, man is uniquely created in God's image. No one else bears the image of God. Not the cows, not the rocks, not the mountains. There are some popular authors as of late who try to say that the angels are also imagers. They image God, but that's not clear from the biblical text in any way, shape, or form. It is human beings who uniquely are created in God's image. Second, the plural us that we just read is best understood as a reference to the Trinity. Some people will say he's talking to the angels that have already been created. Some people say this is the divine or the majestic we or us. But really, I think the best approach here is to see this as a reference to the Trinity. And Bavinck is very helpful here. I just want you to consider this. At the calling into being of the other creatures, we read simply that God spoke. God said, and it happened. He said, and it happened. He said, and it happened. Let it be, and it happened. By his speaking, he brought them into existence. But when God is about to create man, he first confers with himself. Let us. And he rouses himself to make men in his image and likeness. This goes to indicate that especially the creation of man rests on deliberation, on divine wisdom and goodness and omnipotence. There is something unique being communicated when the narrative stops from God said, let there be, and there was light. He said, let it be, and it happened. And he says, let us make man in our image and our likeness. Okay, this is important. The words image and likeness, tselem and demuth, are parallel terms. When you read in Genesis 1 what we just read, image is not one thing and likeness is another. They both mean the same thing. And the Hebrews do this all the time. This is the fundamental structure of the book of Psalms. It's the fundamental structure of Hebrew poetry. The Hebrews say one thing, and then they say the very same thing a different way. The book of Proverbs is filled with this. Okay, Hebrew parallelism, that's what's happening here with image and likeness. These are parallel terms. We also read about the cultural mandate. There's a call to multiply and to exercise dominion. In this creation origin story, it is good for human beings to multiply. And for human beings to multiply, there needs to be a male and a female. And you live in a world that says that's not necessary. But any good farmer will tell you, 2 bulls ain't going to get it done. Okay? You need a male and you need a female. That's built into the creation story. Okay? They are to subdue the created order. They're not to abuse it or take advantage of it, but they're to rule it, and they're to be God's representatives. Genesis 1:31, the summary statement, reminds us that God created human beings in a state of integrity, innocence, and holiness. And that comes straight out of the Hokema quote that I've given to you here. Integrity, innocence, and holiness. When I talk about integrity here, when Hokema talks about integrity, he's not saying God created stand-up people, like really good people, nice people. Something that is integrated holds together. Something that disintegrates comes apart. So when we use the word integrated here or integrity, what we're saying is something along the lines of structural integrity. It's all holding together. Everything's fulfilling its role and its purpose. Man's body, his soul, his spirit, all of these things are doing exactly what God intended them to do. Okay? Genesis chapter 5. Look with me at Genesis 5. Notice Genesis 5 is after Genesis 3. And Genesis 3 is the story of the fall. So we have leapfrogged the fall, and we jump to Genesis chapter 5, verse 1. This is the book of the generations of Adam. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. Male and female, he created them. He blessed them and named them man when they were created. When Adam had lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness, after his image, and he named him Seth. The days of Adam after he fathered Seth were 800 years. He had other sons and daughters. All the days Adam lived were 930 years. and he died. Okay? Just a couple of thoughts here. We'll move quickly. The pairing of the words image and likeness indicates that these are parallel terms. They mean the same thing. Don't do weird Bible study and dive so deep into the meaning of one individual word that you ignore the context and you pull some crazy meaning out of the text. Image and likeness, they mean the same thing. Romans 5 tells us that Adam passed his sinful nature to his children, but the image of God has not been lost or destroyed. So we're going to talk about Romans 5 as we move through this study. We're not going to focus on it tonight. But one of the things taught there is that when Adam died, we all died. When Adam sinned, we all sinned. And this sinful nature is passed down, but we've not lost the image of God or the likeness of God. We still retain it, and we still reflect that on some level or to some degree. Okay, one last Old Testament text I want us to read is Genesis 9, verse 1. God blessed Noah and his sons, and he said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." Should sound familiar. "The fear of you and the dread of you shall be on every beast of the earth and every bird of the heavens, everything that creeps on the ground, all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they're delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. As I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. You shall not eat flesh with its life, that is the blood. And for your lifeblood I will require a reckoning. From every beast I will require it, and from man. From his fellow man I will require a reckoning for the life of man." Why? Why is God so serious about this? Right? Genesis 6:5, violence had filled the earth. People were corrupt and they were violent. And God says, look, there needs to be a reckoning, an account given. It's a life for a life here. And here's the justification. Verse 6, "Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for God made man in his own image. And you be fruitful and multiply, increase greatly on the earth and multiply in it." Okay, two quick thoughts. God's instructions to Noah are an echo of his instructions to Adam and Eve. There's lots of parallels there. And human life must be valued and protected and accounted for because of the image of God. It is because God created man in his own image that there has to be a reckoning of this lifeblood if a life is taken. Okay, you got to get this deep in your bones, and you got to have some steel in your spine, because as Christians today, when you speak about abortion, murder, end of life issues, violence, rape, whatever, there are increasing numbers of people who will say to you, "Why don't you mind your own religious business? And why don't you quit imposing your beliefs on everyone else? And why don't you quit telling us how to live our lives?" And you got to have the steel in your spine to say, no, because of what I believe, that human beings are made in God's image, there has to be a reckoning towards these atrocities when they take place. There needs to be laws that protect people, and there has to be a consequence when these laws are transgressed. Okay, I'm going to let you read Psalm 8. We're short on time. Hokema gives a little comment here about Psalm 8, and you can see the connections to the passages in Genesis. Okay, you have read now the foundational Old Testament texts about the image of God. And we're not going to look at these New Testament texts because of time, but I just want to point out three groups of texts. Okay, the first is a group of one, James 3:9. James says the reason you shouldn't curse other people is because they're made in God's image. They're on this side of the fall. They're sinful, they're wicked, they're depraved, they're alienated from God, but they still reflect the image of God. They still bear His image. They're still imagers of God created in His likeness. And they have value and they have dignity. And your cursing of those people is wrong because they bear God's image. James is saying it's as if you're cursing God when you curse one of His image bearers. Okay, the next group of texts all talk about Jesus as the perfect example of what the image of God looks like in sinless humanity. Okay, you can go through and read those. Jesus is presented as the exact imprint of God's nature, the very image and likeness of God. And this last group of texts, starting with Romans 8, talk about our salvation where God is restoring His image in us. It's been defaced, it's been changed in some sense. It hasn't been completely lost, but it's not what God originally intended it to be. And in our salvation, God is restoring the image of God in us. He's making us more like Christ, who is the image of God. Okay? This is a richer, fuller view of salvation than, do you want to go to heaven when you die? You don't want to go to hell, do you? Raise your hand. You want to go to heaven? Every head bowed, every eye closed. Great, we're all going to heaven. This is saying you have an origin story that involves great dignity. And as we'll talk about next month, something terrible happened right after our origin. And it has affected all of us. And God has gone to the greatest lengths to restore what He originally created in human beings, which is the image of His Son, His own image. God's doing that in our lives. Okay? Now, here's the one thing I haven't told you yet. What is the image of God? I haven't actually defined it. So, let's work through this list. The substantive view argues that the image of God is some specific characteristic or quality in humans. Maybe it's our consciousness or our rationality or our speech or our creativity. It's something in us, like you could point to it almost, the substantive view. Second, the relational view argues that the image of God correlates to the relationships that have eternally existed in the Trinity. Father, Son, and Spirit, they've eternally related to each other. When God created people, He created us to have relationships with each other and relationships with Him. So the fact that we're relational creatures, maybe that's the image of God. Number 3, the functional view says the image of God is found in the exercise of dominion and the use of technology. So we grow crops and we build buildings and we invent medicines and we make art, and we're the only creature that does these things. And so maybe this functional thing that we do is the image of God. Or maybe, just maybe, here's where I land, and I think you ought to land. The combination view, that's a terrible name for a position. The combination view argues that the image of God can't be singled out as only one of the above. Rather, the substantive, relational, functional views are all correct, and they're part of the image of God in us. Okay, it's all of this stuff. It's all of the things that make us unique as human beings. Be careful how you hear this last statement. The image of God is not a distinct part of who we are. Human beings don't have the image of God. We are the image of God. Now, we're sinful. We're fallen. We don't reflect God properly. We don't image Him properly. We don't exercise dominion properly. Our relationships are a wreck. But this is what I'm saying to you. It's not like the image of God is just one piece of you or one part of you, or one little thing that can be singled out or slivered out. But it's the entirety of who you are. And this really matters. Because if you say, no, the image of God is the ability to talk. Well, what about a human being who loses that ability? Are they no longer an image bearer worthy of life and dignity? If you say the image of God is the ability to make art or medicine or architecture or agriculture, does a baby then have the image of God? Because babies don't do any of that stuff. What if you say, well, no, the image of God is just our consciousness? Well, what do you then say to somebody who's in a coma or who can't think clearly, or somebody who has they're born with a mental disability? Do you then say that person is not worthy of dignity? And I'll be honest with you, there are secular people who answer all of those questions and say, that's exactly right. Babies are not worthy of life until they can grow up and they know something. And old people who are on their way out, they lose the ability to function and contribute. They're of no value. And if you have some sort of mental disability, we should just thin out the herd and be rid of you. Those are all questions of anthropology. And so you got to have a sound biblical idea for what is the Imago Dei. It's all of these things that we just discussed. Now, really quickly, I'm going to give you some debated questions. 2 of them. How many parts do human beings have? First view is called dichotomy. It means human beings have 2 parts. You have a physical part and you have a spiritual part or a soul. The second argument is trichotomy, that says human beings have three parts. You have a body, you have a spirit, and you have a soul. And one of my favorite authors in the whole world is a trichotomist. And when I read it, I just think, this is crazy. This makes no sense to me. And I just worked through the end of the Hokema book today, and it's just a slam dunk that there is no biblical distinction between your soul and your spirit. Those terms are used more or less interchangeably. You don't have three parts, you have two parts. You have a physical part and you have a spiritual part. Now listen very carefully. Sometimes people say, human beings, we are souls that have bodies. As if your body is not important. But God created you to have a body. And in the end, you're going to have a resurrection body. And the Lord Jesus Christ, who's been raised from the dead, never to die again, has a physical body. That is part of what it means to be a human being. It's not incidental to what it means to be a human being. So I would fall in this dichotomous camp. Much more tricky. Where does your soul or spirit actually come from? And I'll just give you the three views here. Some argue for the pre-existence of human souls. This is the church father Origen, and it's our Mormon friends who say way back in the beginning, somehow, different ideas here, God made all these souls, and they're just kind of like up in a queue, up in a line in heaven waiting for their moment to come down. They're just all up there, and you've been around for an awful long time. Pre-existence of human souls. That has never been a mainstream view. It's not really an orthodox view on any level, but you'll hear about it. Secondly, this is traducianism. Some people have argued that each soul is generated from the souls of parents, just like the body is generated from the bodies of parents. So where does your body come from? Well, you have a part from your dad and a part from your mom, and those two things come together, and there's life, and you get some DNA here and there, and it weds together, and it's a miraculous thing. But scientists can look at that and say, you got these genes from mom, you got these genes from dad physically. And some people say, well, you get your soul in the same way. You get a little part from mom and a little part from dad, and there it comes together, and there's you. The third view is that each soul is uniquely created by God at the moment of conception. This is the traditional Catholic view, and this is actually the view of most of the Reformers and most Protestants. And when you sort these, which we're not going to do, when you sort this second and third view out, what you're dealing with is, how do you account for our sinful nature which is passed down? Where does that come from? If God makes your soul unique at the moment of your physical conception and it's a unique creation, how does sin get passed down from generation to generation? Because none of us would say that God creates sin or sinful people. And so this is a thorny question, and I'll be honest with you, I appreciate Hokema, who just says, you know what, there's some mystery here. And where the Bible speaks, we should speak. And where the Bible doesn't tell us anything, we should probably just zip it and not say too much and go beyond our limits. Okay? Let's apply all this. Lots of quotes here. I'm not going to read all these quotes to you. I'm going to apply this stuff we've talked about regarding the image of God on three levels. How does it impact our relationship with God, our religion? How does it impact our relationship with others, which would be the issue of ethics? And how does it impact our relationship with creation, which would be our work or our vocation? Okay, just a couple of levels of application here. So we'll start with God. As image bearers, human beings are called to mirror God, to represent God, to know God, and to live under His authority. That's what it means to be an image bearer. It's not a definition of the image of God, but it's what does it mean to be an image bearer? Well, it means that you are created to mirror God, to reflect Him, to represent Him on this earth, to know Him, and to live under His authority. This is the baseline question of why in the world are you here? Or any of us here. Why do we exist? What is our purpose? What is the one thing that we would say applies to all of us for a reason for existing? And whatever you believe about our origin story is going to have an outsized view on how you define this. Hokema, to be a human is to be directed toward God. Our culture says to be fully human, you have to just live out whatever stuff you find living in the basement of your heart. That's how you can be authentically human. You just make up whatever identity or future or any of it that you want to pursue. But what the Bible is saying is, if you want to be truly human, if you want to really live out your purpose, here it is. Mirror God, represent God, know God, and live under His authority. Way down at the bottom, Bavinck says you're only truly human to the extent that you display God in your daily lives. Anything that falls short of that is less than truly human in God's design for human beings. Other worldviews and religions operate with different theology and different anthropology. Okay, this is not rocket science. Darwin takes God out of the equation. There's no God. We don't need a God. When you take God out, theology, what's the result for your anthropology? It was survival of the fittest. Dog eat dog. Who comes out on top? Might be you today, it might be somebody else tomorrow. In an ecological worldview, you take God out of it and you put the ecology or nature at the center of it, and what you end up saying is you're no more important than the crickets. You're just a cog in this wheel. You don't have any more reason to exist than the salamander. We got to protect the salamander. They're as important as a human being. So we're going to make decisions based on this overall system. God's been taken out of it. Psychology, and you could add to that psychiatry. You're just chemistry. You're just chemical reactions. It started with two cells coming together, your mom and your dad, and everything has just been chemistry after that. It's all predetermined. You are who you are. There's nothing that can be said about any of it. Hinduism is a different worldview. Hinduism says you're God. That's their anthropology. You're part of God. You are God, just like the chair is God and the building's God and the birds are God. You're all part of God. And then Mormonism, which is an entirely different worldview, says, you know what? You can be God. You can become God, a God. What I'm saying to you is that when you change theology, it impacts anthropology. And when you change anthropology, it impacts your theology. These things are connected and they're wedded together. Sin has marred the image of God in human beings, and we have turned to idolatry. Sin has changed us fundamentally, and that's impacted our relationship with God. The Bible speaks about this in Romans 1, which we've talked about recently on Sundays. One last thought under religion. Salvation involves the full and final restoration of the image of God. Okay, in your regeneration, in your sanctification, in your eventual glorification, what God is aiming to do is to restore and cleanse and purify and fix His image in you that has been marred and defaced by the fall and by your own sin. Okay, let's talk about ethics, the image of God and our relationships with others. The biblical teaching about the image of God is the foundation for our commitment to human dignity and human rights. The reason we care about human dignity, the reason we care about the rights of human beings, and we care about things like freedom, is because we believe people are created in God's image. And when you go places in the world where they don't believe that human beings are uniquely and specially created in God's image, they have a very different view of human dignity and human rights. And it's a mess. And you can go lots of places in the Western world, Western Europe, and increasingly the United States. And there are secular, godless, atheistic people who will still talk about human rights and human dignity and on and on and on, but they're using the words and changing the meaning, and they are living off the fumes of a dominant Christian worldview. And eventually those fumes run out. And eventually everyone realizes the emperor doesn't have any clothes on. If we don't believe there's a God and we don't believe human beings are unique, then why do we care about equal opportunity for people? Why do we care about freedom? Why do we care about dignity for people? Worldviews that operate with unbiblical theology and unbiblical anthropology end up with unbiblical ethics. And you could just add to that out beside it every time. Every time. When you get off on theology and you get off on anthropology, you will be off on morality and ethics. Bavinck gives you just one example. Ethics in the true sense of the word does not exist within a Darwinian framework. You lose it. You lose all sense of right and wrong, morality, ought to, should. All that stuff goes out the window when you take God out. When you take God out, you lose who we are, and then everything's up for grabs. It's a total mess. Okay? Because of the reality of sin, we should be realist when we think about family, friends, church, and country. And we'll talk more about sin next month. We don't want to dip into that too much tonight, but we do live in a fallen world, and sin affects all of us, our family, our friends, our church experience, our political experience. All of it is impacted by sin, and we want to be wise people. We don't want to be foolish. We don't want to present things as they aren't. We want to be honest about the world that we live in. We want to be realists. Last, under ethics, our obedience to the Great Commandment, the Great Commission, must be motivated first by the glory of God. That's theology. And second, by our love of neighbor. So I'll give you the obvious example for our church at Emmanuel. Why do we ask you to give to our world missions offering? And why do we take mission trips to Kenya? And why do we feed kids in Kenya? And why do we try to share the gospel with them? And why do we do all of those things? Number one, we want God to be glorified here and there and everywhere in between. We care about God's glory. And number two, we care about those people. They're made in God's image. And they have dignity and they have value. And some of them are hungry. And God has connected us in a unique way where we have the opportunity to help them. And we want to do that because we care about them as image bearers. The image of God and our relationship with creation. I wish we could have maybe we'll tack on a fourth lesson in the spring and talk about this. There's a whole world that we could talk about here. When I look out and think about you guys, I think this is an important topic when we think about work. Fulfilling our vocation is part of bearing the image of God. Bavinck says man was not created for idleness but for work. Go with me to the nursing home and talk to the people who live in the nursing home. And what they will say to you almost to a person is, I feel totally useless. I can't do anything. Now look, they're image bearers. They're not useless. They have value. They're important. They're deserving of dignity. But they're tapping into something that's real. Because we weren't created to be idle. We were created to work. And that goes all the way back to our origin story in the book of Genesis. This is before sin entered the world. God told Adam and Eve to work with their hands in keeping the garden, gave them physical work, and he gave them mental work. Name the animals. Look at them, think about them, study them, classify them, differentiate between them. Both kinds of work are honoring to God. Work you do with your hands and work you do with your mind. And human beings were created to work as part of who we are as image bearers. Our vocation is part of bearing the image of God. All culture, this is Bavinck, that is all work which man undertakes in order to subdue the earth, whether agriculture, stock breeding, commerce, industry, science, working in the oil field, all the rest. It's the fulfillment of a single divine calling. Okay? Your work is not a secular thing you do that has no bearing on who you are as a human being and your relationship to the Lord. But your work is inherent to who you are as a human being, and all work is God-honoring work. Not just work you do at a church, but all work is God-honoring work because God created us to exercise dominion and to work. All right, conclusion very quick. As creative beings, we have the responsibility to glorify our Creator. We're not autonomous, we're accountable to God. It is our responsibility to glorify Him. Number two, as relational beings, we have the responsibility to love our neighbor. It's not optional. Every person you ever meet on this planet bears the image of God. And your calling is to show them biblical, Christian, truth-filled love. Number three, as ruling beings, we have the responsibility to steward creation. You are more valuable than the salamanders and the crickets. And the decisions we make about how we live in this world should be based not on, first and foremost, above all else, as equal anything that we find in nature, but on what would be beneficial and helpful and promote flourishing among human beings. We're to be good stewards of creation. Number four, as spiritual beings, we must remember that the image of God is displayed most perfectly in sinless humanity, which reminds us of the miracle of the incarnation in the person of Jesus Christ. All right, there was a lot there. That's a foundational lesson. Everything that we're going to talk about moving forward builds on that. Next month, we'll talk about the doctrine of sin. I think 9 times out of 10, when people come talk to me as a pastor and they're struggling with a particular doctrine, 9 out of 10, we can trace it back to they don't understand what the Bible teaches about sin on some level. It really, really is important that you understand that. Week 3, we'll talk about gender and sexuality, and then we'll get very specific. In the spring, we'll talk about being a husband and a father and a churchman. All right, let's pray. God, we love you. We're grateful for your word. We are thankful that you have not left us to wonder who we are or what our purpose is or why you made us or how we should live. But you have spoken to us in the scriptures, and you've told us all these things clearly and directly. And Lord, we live in a time and a place where people are confused and they have hardened their hearts and they have turned away from your revelation to us, and they have preferred lies to the truth. And we ask that you would give us steel in our spine as men leading our homes and leading in this church to believe the truth about what Scripture says about you and about us, and to order our lives and our homes and our church accordingly. We are not independent. We submit to your authority and your rule and your reign in our lives, and we do it joyfully and gladly. We love you, and we pray all of these things in Jesus' name. Amen.